Hello, my name's Norman Scholes and welcome to the northeast coast of Yorkshire. We're in Whitby, which is famous for two things. One of them is fish and chips and the other one is James Cook, probably the world's greatest maritime explorer.
Well, James Cook was employed by John Walker, who lived at this house in Whitby, as an apprentice. He's sailing on collier ships, carrying coals from Newcastle and Hartlepool down to London, and also going across to the Baltic to bring timber back, which was also taken down to London.
Visitors arrive mainly by car or by the Esk Valley Rail Line from Middlesbrough. However, an increasing number of visitors can now arrive by a steam service provided by the North Yorkshire Moors Railway. Undoubtedly one of the most popular and successful of today's restored heritage railway lines, it is now contributing greatly to the local economy. It was not always like this. Whitby had reached its peak as a whaling port and shipbuilding centre in the latter half of the 18th century, but its isolated position within hospitable moors surrounding it meant that the Industrial Revolution of the early 1800s was passing it by. It was in serious decline. The railway era had begun in 1825 when, on the 10th of October, the Stockton and Darlington Railway carried its first fare-paying passenger. It cost 1 shilling, 5 pence, and passengers were allowed to carry a load of up to 14 pounds or about 6 kilograms. Although steam locomotives were used to pull wagons, the passenger coach was pulled by horses. By 1830, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway was operating, and it was becoming apparent that railways were to have a major influence on the country's economy. A publication appeared in Whitby in 1831, the contents of which supported the construction of a railway line between Whitby and Pickering. The identity of the author has never been determined, but he was almost certainly a prominent local businessman. Over the next 9 months, many schemes were proposed, including one which involved a long tunnel from near Mallion Spout to beyond Goathland. Lovely. George Stephenson, the engineer who had pioneered the railways, was consulted, and in July 1832 he presented his findings. He recommended a railway between Whitby and Pickering which dissected the moors. He estimated its cost to be £48,000. In September, at a meeting here in the Angel Hotel, £30,000 was subscribed, which equates to approximately £1 million today. In May the following year, royal assent was granted for the building of the railway. As with all railways being built at this time, the primary purpose was to carry goods. Fred Swanwick, Stephenson's apprentice, led the team of surveyors on the detailed engineering work, and there were many major obstacles in the 24 miles to Pickering to be overcome. 9 wooden bridges were required to cross the Esk in the first 7 miles, and the river itself was diverted at Larpool. On New Year's Day 1834, the new River Esk cut was opened. The line to Gromont was officially opened on Monday the 8th of June 1835, when the company's coach named Premier left Whitby at 2 p.m. for Gromont, then called Tunnel, and returned at 8 p.m. Passengers paid 1 shilling to sit on the roof of the coach and 1 3d to ride inside. Another second-class coach operated on Saturdays with a 6-penny fare. The engineers still had a lot of work to do, with major engineering feats still to be completed. The oldest structure of the railway is this original tunnel of 1834, 120 yards long, and it is believed to be the oldest railway tunnel in the world. Having penetrated Lees Rig, the next major problem was the steep rise from Beckhole to Goathland. The climb is almost a mile long, with 1500 yards at a gradient of 1 in 11. It was George Stephenson himself who designed the self-acting system, using a water tank on wheels to counterbalance 3 coaches coupled to it. The final obstacle was the formidable Fen Bog at the summit of the line. Here George Stephenson used his experience gained when constructing the Liverpool and Manchester Railway over Chat Moss. Using a combination of heather interlaced with hurdles or wrapped in sheep fleeces, together with pilings of Baltic fir trees and an extensive drainage system, the bog was eventually stabilised. The line was opened throughout on the 26th of May 1836 and a stagecoach operated from Pickering to York to connect with the railway there. It took 2.5 hours to travel the 24-mile length of the line. Very quickly, new industries sprang up along the line, in particular the quarrying of limestone, ironstone and building stone. Little of these remain today, but of note is the road to Lees Rig, built on the inclined tramway which served the stone quarries there. Although large numbers of passengers were travelling, some 6,000 in the first year alone, and many thousands of tons of stone were being transported, losses were being made, and in 1840 it was clear that the line had to amalgamate. Onto the scene came George Hudson. Born at Howsham in 1800, he once vowed to "mak' all railways come to York." In 1835 he had met George Stephenson in Whitby and they became business partners and friends. In 1843 he formed the Whitby Building Company. After promising a new dock and railway, he became its MP. In 1844, at the height of the railway mania, he controlled 1,000 miles of railway track. In 1845, the York and North Midland Railway, controlled by George Hudson, opened the line from York to Scarborough, with a branch from Rillington to Pickering. He purchased the Whitby and Pickering Railway for £80,000, a knockdown price, and it then became part of his fast expanding railway empire, and he quickly went about a major improvement programme. The line was re-engineered to dual track, the wooden bridges replaced in stone, and steam locomotives took over from the horses, entering Pickering in October 1845 and Whitby for the first time on Friday the 4th of June 1847. At Beckhole, the water balance system was dispensed with and stationary steam engines were installed. New and permanent stations were built and many other structures needed for steam power, including a new tunnel at Gromont. In Pickering, as well as a new station, he built a gasworks which also served the town's street lighting system. Probably the oldest railway gasworks still in existence, today it houses a ladies' hairdressers. George Hudson was also responsible for the laying out of roads and the building of hotels in the West Cliff area of Whitby, the railway bringing the first tourists to the town. In 1848 he was a millionaire. In 1849 his empire collapsed. In 1854 the North Eastern Railway came into existence, an amalgamation of many northern lines, including the York and North Midland Railway. The Beck-Hole incline had always caused delays and other problems as it was too steep to be worked by locomotives. Following a fatal accident on the 10th of February 1864, a new route was engineered for a distance of about 4 miles south of Gromont, which necessitated a new station at Goathland Mill. This new deviation line involved some heavy engineering work, including 4 overbridges and 7 underbridges, and was built for the tender price of £56,000. It was opened on the 1st of July 1865. The incline then fell into disuse, but in 1872 a 3-foot 7-inch gauge line was laid to test locomotives destined for Brazil. For a period of 6 years, from 1908 to 1914, the line was reopened to Beck-Hole from Gromont, and autocars were run from July to September for holidaymakers. Block signalling, introduced in the 1870s, required the building of a number of signal boxes, or cabins as they were called then, which have all since been demolished and only some replaced. 12 cottages for the signalmen were built, costing £2,177 for the lot. This cottage at Farworth is probably one of them. In 1908, many bridges were replaced, rebuilt or strengthened. This bridge at Darnholm was replaced, built wholly of brick, the only one on the line. In 1923, the North Eastern Railway was absorbed into the London and North Eastern Railway. The years until the war began in 1939 were economically poor, and the railway suffered accordingly. The workforce was cut back, responsibilities reallocated, and duties combined, such as signalman and porter. Some signal boxes were closed, including the one at Newtondale. World War II placed further heavy demands on the railways, and by the end, in 1945, the infrastructure was very run down through lack of maintenance and the money to finance it. The railways were nationalised in 1948, and although new steam engines were built, there was still a need to economise. In 1952, the white and purple overall roof at Pickering was removed. The roof at Whitby a year later. The increase in car ownership meant that the railways had a fight on their hands to survive, as people took to them for personal transport in ever increasing numbers. Modernisation also brought with it new practices, and diesel locomotives and rail cars began to replace the steam engines, but it was a battle which was always going to be lost. Dr. Beeching, in his report in 1963, brought the axe down on most rural lines, and the Whitby to Pickering Railway was not to be spared. The last British Railways passenger train ran on the line on the 8th of March 1965, and goods traffic ceased a year later. This could have easily been the end of the story, but it was not to be. On the 3rd of June 1967, Tom Salmon called a meeting of interested people at his home in Russup.
As soon as I knew enough people to form a nucleus, I called a meeting at my home on the 3rd of June 67. That was actually attended by 6 people with 4 apologies, and it all started from there.
So from a tiny group of half a dozen people, we've now got to the present day stage of, well, I would say thousands of people being involved in some way or other, ensuring that the Whitby Pickering line continues.
That's right. It was a very gradual process, and in those years between the formation of the society and the reopening of the line by the Duchess, there was an immense amount of work to be done. One of the things that helped us was the very striking increase in membership in the early days. For instance, the village of Goathland alone provided us with 100 members. Those were terrific boosts to what we were trying to do.
In fact, it went from hundreds to thousands, didn't it?
That's right. At the peak, we had about 9,000 members, yes.
Well, this is really good stuff, because with that sort of numbers, you know, the resistance to what you were doing would probably have crumbled very quickly.
That's right.
And
I should have mentioned that British Railways, when we formed the group originally, gave us a 6-month stay of execution on lifting the track. They gave us 6 months to show what sort of progress we could make. And in the meantime, they didn't allow any track to be lifted.
Of course, taking over a railway with track in situ would have made life much easier for your group.
That's right, the line was double track, but we only bought single line. But due to friends at court in British Railways, we were always able to choose the best section of track to be retained. We got a lot of help in that way from 1 or 2 contacts in British Railways who were very kind to us.
So, with a mixture of effort, goodwill, hard work, and of course a massive will, you finally managed to reopen the line.
Yes, that was a great day, of course, when the Duchess came up. Culmination of 6 years of hard work. And from then on, of course, it was a different kettle of fish altogether. It was a case of operating a railway. But I didn't have any more to do with that. I thought other people should carry on, and I didn't want to be putting my nose in. I knew nothing about operating railways, so I retired then.
Today sees the railway with more passengers than even George Hudson could have imagined, and it is probably the most successful of all preserved lines worked by steam in the country. It has a universal appeal to people of all age groups. Although many original features of the line have, over the years, disappeared, there are still many interesting reminders of times long past. So let us take a closer look at the stations along the line. Whitby is the northern terminus of the line. The North Yorkshire Moors Railway does not own this station, but has been allowed to run steam services to it on a regular basis from 2007. The station, the largest on the line, was built in 1846 and replaced the original one, which stood approximately where the deserted engine shed is now. It was designed by the York architect George Andrews, who built many of George Hudson's railway buildings. It cost £10,640 and has stood the test of time well. Unusually, it has two entrances, one alongside what was the original departure platform and another at the end of the lines. Its capacity had to be increased with the arrival of the line through the Esk Valley in 1865, and two further platforms were built. Eventually, with the arrival of the line from Redcar along the coast in 1883 and from Scarborough in 1885, the town was being served from 4 different directions and was probably at its busiest during the 1930s. Today only one platform is in use, and where the extra platforms and goods yard once stood is a supermarket and car park. Still in situ is the beautiful tile map showing the lines of the North Eastern Railway. Of the original 1835 station, only these forlorn ruins of one of a pair of warehouses remain a short distance up the line.
Well, this is where the weighman operated, and actually the remains of where the weighing machine was fixed on the wall are still there, these old iron rivets. And there's a great mortise hole that goes through the flag in the bottom that went out under the weigh table. The weighman could observe the stone wagons coming outside and log them, and that was his job, because one of the main exports was stone from Hazelby Quarry that was shipped out of Whitby all over the country for London Bridge, I hear, and to Copenhagen. So, but the building itself was, Robert Stevenson was the engineer, and the best stonemason in Whitby, Mr. Bolton, that built churches, were the appointed stonemason. And the shape of the building is, they went for a Grecian look, so they went to all this trouble with this beautiful curved back wall, and that were the living quarters of the weighman, and also a ticket office for the passengers that came down by carriage down the bank and caught the horse-drawn railway to Pickering.
Journeying south, we follow the estuary of the Esk, which is crossed for the first time just after passing through Russup Station, only 1.5 miles from Whitby. The fine station house is now holiday accommodation. At Slates, again the work of architect Andrews, the station master's house is today a private residence. The platform area is well maintained, unlike the old signal box. Crossing and recrossing the river, the next station is Gromont. It is named after Gromont Priory, which was sited close to the river nearby, but not a trace remains. Today's visitor sees a rural scene, but when the railway opened, an industrial town soon developed, with iron smelting mills, brickworks and many local quarries, together with feeder lines. This is where the present day railways workshops are located and is a hive of activity. After passing these, the railway climbs steeply on the deviation line to reach Goathland. Built in 1865 to replace the station at the top of the incline, it was designed by Thomas Prosser of the North Eastern Railway and remains very little changed after almost 150 years. It has been seen by millions all over the world, as it features as Hogwarts Station in the Harry Potter series of films and as Aidensfield in the long-running TV series Heartbeat. Both these are responsible for many visitors to this moorland village. The journey to Pickering continues over the summit to the loneliest and newest station on the line. Newtondale Halt can only be accessed by foot and trains stop only on request. A wonderful place to alight and take a superb walk in the heart of the North Yorkshire moors. On then to Levisham Station, serving the village of this name some 2 miles away. The station was built by the York and North Midland Railway in 1845, when the line was converted to dual track and steam working, and replaced a stabling halt at Raindale. The station master's house, formerly a farm, jutted into the new platform, which utilised the stone blocks which were used as sleepers on the original railway. Today, this is the home of the railway's artist-in-residence, Christopher Ware.
Yeah, well, this building's interesting because it's older than the railway. There was a farm here long before the railway was built, and then they started trying to get ironstone out, and this became a freight railway. And if you look at the house, you can see the first 2/3 of it is the old farm, and then the railway built a little bit on the end of it to be their ticket office. Now, I think that's the closest building to a railway in the country, because it was built in the days of horse-drawn trains when it didn't matter that they were so close. Now, when the iron ore turned out not to be worth mining, they then went to passengers, and the trains came through here and were steam hauled, and suddenly we're right up against a steam railway. Now, I'm not the first person to be in that position. The station master lived here, and he had to be signalman and parcels man and all those things. And Walter Artley was the last man who earned his living working here until me. And now I'm the artist in residence for the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, and I work here in my studio earning my living. So a different kind of railway tradition, but here I am earning my money from the railway.
Of course. Thanks very much indeed, Chris.
The pair of plate-laced cottages next to the crossing were built in 1858 at a cost of only £99 each. When British rail services ceased in 1965, the station was abandoned to the elements, and today it stands as a tribute to many years of hard work by dedicated volunteers who have brought it back to life. Two miles further south, the line passes Farworth Crossing, the farm and buildings here still being without mains electricity. Our journey ends at Pickering, the southern terminus of the line, built by our old friend G.T. Andrews as the bookend for Whitby. Again, it was built closer to the town than the original station and also had an overall roof, which is shortly to be replaced. The pretty market town, overlooked by its ancient castle, benefits greatly from the regular influx of tourists brought by the railway. On platform 2 is the Train of Thought Visitor Centre. It is here at Pickering that I end my journey through the history of the railway. It seems to me that the contribution of three men stand out. George Stephenson, who conceived and created it. George Hudson, who converted and improved it. And Tom Salmon, who was instrumental in resurrecting it. But it is to the third of these figures that we and future generations owe a huge debt of gratitude, enabling us to continue enjoying this wonderfully scenic steam railway.